Ethan Parker stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie for what felt like the 100th time. Every minor imperfection, every wrinkle in his suit seemed to scream at him under the harsh glow of his small bathroom light. At 24 years old, Ethan had spent years preparing for this day, not just academically, but emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. His reflection showed a young man with determined brown eyes and a neatly combed head of hair, though the slight tremble in his hands betrayed the nerves brewing beneath the surface. Today, he would walk into Whitmore Financial Group, one of the most prestigious firms on Wall Street, and make his case for why he deserved a seat at the table. This wasn't just another interview. This was the culmination of countless late nights, studying under flickering fluorescent lights, of juggling part-time jobs with full-time coursework, and of a stubborn refusal to let circumstances define his destiny. Growing up in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the edge of Newark, Ethan had seen firsthand what struggle looked like. His mother, Laura Parker, had worked two jobs for most of his life days at a local diner, nights cleaning offices to keep a roof over their heads and ensure Ethan had a shot at something better. There had been no vacations, no fancy birthday parties, no new clothes unless absolutely necessary. Every dollar had been stretched, every dream carefully rationed. Yet through it all, Laura had given Ethan something far more valuable than material comfort belief. She believed that he was destined for more, that his mind and heart could take him places she had only ever seen on television. It was for her, as much as for himself, that Ethan had pushed relentlessly through 4 grueling years at State University, graduating with top honors in finance while balancing shifts at a coffee shop just to afford textbooks and living expenses. Today represented the first tangible proof that all the sacrifices might actually pay off. Ethan had spent 3 months setting aside whatever tips he could spare to buy the navy blue suit he now wore, the most expensive item he owned. He had even splurged on a leather portfolio, polished his shoes until they shined like mirrors, and printed multiple copies of his resume on heavy professional-grade paper. Every detail had been considered, every variable accounted for. His plan was simple: arrive at the Whitmore building at least 45 minutes early, review his notes one last time in the lobby, and walk into the interview room composed, confident, and utterly prepared. Nothing would be left to chance. He had even practiced his handshake and answers to common interview questions in front of a mirror for hours the night before, fine-tuning his delivery until every word flowed smoothly. He glanced once more around his tiny apartment, memorizing it in case today marked the beginning of a new chapter. The mismatched furniture, the second-hand bookshelves stacked with finance textbooks and motivational biographies, the cracked window that whistled when the wind blew. It all felt both suffocating and sacred. This space had witnessed every moment of his journey. The nights of exhaustion, the mornings of renewed determination, the silent prayers whispered into the darkness. Ethan grabbed his leather portfolio, tucking it carefully under his arm, and headed for the door. As he stepped into the hallway, he paused, taking one last deep breath. In his mind, he repeated the mantra he had lived by since high school. Preparation breeds confidence. Confidence breeds opportunity. Outside the city buzzed with its usual early morning energy, oblivious to the significance of the day unfolding for one determined young man. Ethan tucked his chin into the collar of his coat against the crisp spring air and set off toward the subway station. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a good luck text from his mom, simple and heartfelt. "You've already made me proud no matter what happens." The words steadied him more than any self-rehearsed speech ever could. No matter how intimidating the gleaming towers of Wall Street might be, Ethan knew he carried with him something stronger than ambition, a lifetime of resilience, gratitude, and a fierce commitment to doing right by the sacrifices that had paved his way. As he boarded the subway portfolio clutched tightly against his chest, Ethan mentally rehearsed his strategy once more. Whitmore Financial Group wasn't just another firm. It was a symbol of excellence, innovation, and integrity. If he could secure a position there, even at the lowest rung, he could set a foundation for a career that would lift both himself and his mother into a life of stability and dignity. He envisioned the interviewers seated across a polished table, their questions sharp but fair. He imagined himself responding with poise, with clarity, with a quiet yet unshakable confidence that would make them see what so many had overlooked before. This was his moment. And whether the day ended in success or disappointment, Ethan promised himself he would walk into that room knowing he had done everything within his power to be ready. Ethan had barely emerged from the subway station when the first fat drops of rain began to fall. At first he thought nothing of it, after all. The weather report had only mentioned a slight chance of showers. He pulled his coat tighter around himself and quickened his pace, confident he could beat whatever mild drizzle threatened his morning. But within minutes the sky darkened unnaturally, and a violent crack of thunder split the air, causing Ethan to jump. What began as a light sprinkle rapidly transformed into a torrential downpour. The streets, busy just moments ago with morning commuters, turned into scenes of chaos as pedestrians scattered umbrellas, flipping inside out under the assault of fierce winds. Ethan froze for a heartbeat, staring up at the boiling sky, then hunched over his leather portfolio and broke into a jog heart, pounding against the rising roar of the storm. Within blocks, the storm proved far more powerful than anything the forecasts had warned. Water streamed down the gutters like rivers pooling at curbs and spilling across intersections. The rain pelted Ethan mercilessly, soaking through his coat, seeping into his suit jacket, and plastering his carefully combed hair to his forehead. His leather shoes, so carefully polished. The night before, squelched with every step as they splashed through ankle-deep puddles. Transportation was out of the question. Ride-sharing apps showed no available drivers. Taxis were nowhere to be found. Even the subway system, his fallback plan, flashed alerts of delays and closures due to flooding. Panic prickled along his spine as he realized that no matter how much he had prepared, no matter how carefully he had planned, he was now at the mercy of a storm that cared nothing for dreams or desperation. Clutching his portfolio against his chest as if it could shield him from disaster, Ethan pressed onward. His neatly pressed navy suit was quickly becoming a waterlogged mess, the fabric clinging uncomfortably to his skin and growing heavier by the second. Every step was a battle against the wind, the rain, and the cold that seeped into his bones. He ducked into a small awning for a brief moment, wiping rain from his eyes and checking his watch with trembling fingers. He still had time, barely, but only if he kept moving. Standing here would change nothing. Gritting his teeth, Ethan forced himself back into the storm, weaving around abandoned umbrellas, debris, and the occasional desperate pedestrian. His breath came in harsh gasps as he fought his way toward the towering silhouette of Whitmore Financial. In the distance, its gleaming structure distorted by sheets of rain. With every block, it seemed the storm grew angrier. A gust of wind ripped a manhole cover loose a few feet away, sending it clattering across the street. Traffic lights swung dangerously on their poles. Cars crawled along at a snail's pace or stalled completely in the deepening water. Ethan's once pristine portfolio, despite his best efforts, was growing damp at the edges, and he knew with a sickening certainty that if it became completely soaked, the precious documents inside his resume, his letters of recommendation, his carefully prepared financial analysis would be ruined. Every soggy step reminded him that he was losing ground, losing time, and losing the composure he had worked so hard to maintain. Yet even as hopelessness gnawed at the edges of his resolve, Ethan refused to stop. He hadn't come this far to be undone by a freak storm. He reached an intersection where the water was so deep it reached halfway up his shins. Hesitating for only a moment, Ethan plunged through it, his heart hammering in his chest. His shoes were completely destroyed by now, and his once crisp dress socks squished uncomfortably with every movement, but none of it mattered. What mattered was getting to Whitmore Financial. No matter what condition he arrived in, he imagined the interviewers impeccably dressed, dry and punctual, glancing at their watches and making notes about his absence. He imagined the receptionist explaining he hadn't shown up. The very thought sent a surge of adrenaline through his soaked, aching body. If he had to crawl the rest of the way, he would. He wouldn't let the storm steal his future without a fight. Through the curtain of rain and exhaustion, Ethan finally caught a glimpse of the Whitmore building, just a few blocks ahead, its mirrored facade looming like a distant fortress. Relief threatened to buckle his knees, but he pushed forward, driven by sheer willpower now. His body was cold, his appearance wrecked beyond salvage, but he was still standing. Still fighting. Still refusing to surrender. The storm had tested every part of him. His planning, his perseverance, his pride. And he had answered by putting one soaked, battered foot in front of the other. He didn't know if arriving late and drenched would be forgiven. He didn't know if the interviewers would even see him, but Ethan Parker knew one thing with certainty as he staggered toward those glass doors. No storm, no setback, no disaster would make him quit. The Whitmore building loomed just ahead, its sleek glass surface gleaming like a distant beacon through the relentless downpour. Ethan's heart lifted at the sight, a fragile bubble of hope swelling inside his battered chest. He was soaked to the bone, disheveled beyond recognition, but he was close, so close that he could almost feel the polished marble floors beneath his ruined shoes. If he pushed hard for just a few more minutes, he might still salvage this day. Adjusting his grip on the damp leather portfolio, clutched tightly against his chest, Ethan lowered his head against the wind and forced his weary legs into motion again. The city streets, now rivers of water, churned around him as horns blared and lights flickered in the stormy haze. Everything inside him screamed for him to run, to finish what he had started, to get to that interview, no matter what it cost. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he spotted a figure struggling at the side of the flooded street. An elderly man, stooped and fragile, wrestled with a car jack beneath a sleek black sedan that sat at an awkward angle on the curb. The car's front passenger tire was completely flat, the rim nearly sunk into the pooling water. The old man's expensive overcoat was drenched and clung heavily to his thin frame. His silver hair was plastered to his forehead, and his trembling hands fumbled helplessly with the jack which kept slipping against the wet pavement. For a moment, Ethan stood frozen, torn between two worlds. Just a few blocks ahead lay the dream he had chased for years, the culmination of his mother's sacrifices, of his own sleepless nights and relentless ambition. Here at his feet was a stranger in desperate need, unseen by the hurrying, shelter-seeking crowds. The seconds dragged out in a painful tug-of-war inside Ethan's mind. He checked his watch, 9:18 a.m. He was already late. The chances of making it to the interview on time, let alone composed, were slipping through his fingers like the rain itself. Logic screamed at him to keep moving. Someone else would surely stop and help. After all, this was New York City. There were hundreds of people just a few blocks away. Yet as Ethan's gaze locked on the old man's futile efforts, another voice rose in his memory, cutting through the noise and panic. It was his father's voice, deep and steady, speaking words Ethan had heard countless times growing up. Your character isn't measured when life is easy. Son, it's defined by what you choose to do when no one's watching. His father had died when Ethan was only 14, but those words had stayed with him like a compass, guiding his steps when the path grew difficult or unclear. A lump formed in Ethan's throat as the conflict reached its breaking point. He could see the lobby of Whitmore Financial in his mind's eye, the bright lights, the crisp suits, the polished smiles. He could imagine the panelists checking their watches, shaking their heads as his name was crossed off the list. He could envision the opportunity slipping away, his mother's hopeful expression dimming when he told her he hadn't made it. Every rational fiber of his being begged him to look away, to save himself, to prioritize the dream he had sacrificed so much to chase. But his father's voice refused to be silenced. Character integrity, doing the right thing, even when no one else would. Ethan closed his eyes for a split second, feeling the weight of the decision press down on his shoulders, heavier than the rain ever could. With a soft, almost broken sigh, Ethan made his choice. He turned sharply on his heel and jogged toward the elderly man, his shoes splashing through the water, his suit already beyond saving, sir. He called out over the roar of the storm, raising his voice to be heard. The old man looked up, startled, his pale blue eyes wide, with a mixture of frustration and relief. "Let me help you," Ethan said firmly, reaching for the jack with sure hands. Without waiting for permission, he slipped off his soaked jacket and laid it across the curb to kneel on, protecting his knees from the rough, wet pavement. The old man stepped back, shivering slightly, and watched Ethan work with a kind of exhausted wonder. Time slowed around them, the rest of the chaotic city fading into a blur as Ethan focused on loosening the stubborn lug nuts and properly setting the jack. As the car began to rise steadily off the ground, Ethan's mind registered the full gravity of what he had just sacrificed. The minutes ticked mercilessly by. The precious buffer he had built into his schedule was gone. His carefully prepared appearance was ruined, his documents likely damaged beyond repair. He would walk into Whitmore Financial, looking like a drowned man, begging for scraps if they even allowed him through the front doors at all. And yet amidst the cold, the wet, and the exhaustion, Ethan felt something stronger than regret settling in his chest. Peace. He was doing the right thing, even if the world never saw it, even if no one cared. In this moment, Ethan Parker chose to honor the man who had taught him what true success meant. And somehow, deep down, he knew that mattered more than any title or salary could ever promise. The rain continued to pour relentlessly as Ethan knelt on his soaked jacket, working the lug nuts loose with steady hands. Water streamed down his face, his hair plastered to his forehead, his dress shirt clinging to him like a second skin. Every twist of the wrench sent a jolt of cold water splashing up from the flooded pavement. His portfolio, once cradled protectively against his chest, now lay precariously perched on the back seat of the sedan, its edges curling from moisture. Ethan ignored the discomfort, the rising numbness in his fingers, the gnawing voice inside reminding him that time was slipping away with every passing second. He wasn't thinking about his interview anymore. In that moment, there was only the task at hand, making sure this elderly man didn't have to stand alone and helpless in the middle of a merciless storm. The old man stood nearby, partially sheltered by the open trunk of the sedan, watching Ethan with an expression of deep gratitude. His voice, when he spoke, was rough with emotion. "Son, you didn't have to stop," he said. Pulling his drenched overcoat tighter around himself, Ethan didn't look up from his work. "Yes, sir," he said, simply tightening the last lug nut before lowering the car carefully back to the ground. His soaked dress pants were stained with grime from the street, and his shoes squelched loudly every time he shifted his weight. Yet despite his bedraggled appearance, Ethan moved with quiet efficiency. The skills drilled into him from summers spent working at his uncle's garage during high school serving him well now. When he finally straightened, rain dripping from his sleeves, the wheel was secure, the job done. The old man stepped forward, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe water from his eyes. "Let me give you a ride," he offered urgently. "Wherever you're headed, it's the least I can do after your kindness." Ethan hesitated only for a moment before nodding, his body trembling slightly from the cold. He retrieved his soaked portfolio from the back seat, careful not to let it slip from his numbed fingers, and slid into the passenger side of the sedan. As he sank into the leather seat, the reality of the situation washed over him as heavily as the storm outside. His watch read 9:33 a.m., 3 minutes past his scheduled interview time. Even with the stranger's offer of a ride, Ethan knew the truth. Deep down, he was already too late. Whitmore Financial was known for its punctuality, its brutal adherence to schedules. Missing his slot, even by a few minutes, was tantamount to missing his opportunity entirely. The drive toward the Whitmore building was short, but to Ethan it felt agonizingly long. The rain blurred the cityscape into a surreal painting of gray and silver. The old man, whose name Ethan hadn't even thought to ask yet, drove with surprising steadiness for his age, navigating the flooded streets with the caution of someone who had seen many storms in his lifetime. In the heavy silence of the car, Ethan gripped his portfolio tighter, willing himself not to crumble under the weight of what he had just lost. He had worked for years for a chance like this. He had sacrificed weekends, sleep, any semblance of a carefree youth, all for today. And now it was slipping through his fingers like water through a sieve, all because he had chosen to stop and help a stranger in need. When they finally pulled up to the towering entrance of Whitmore Financial Group, Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. The building was even more imposing up close, a fortress of glass and steel that seemed almost to sneer at his disheveled, dripping appearance. The old man parked the sedan carefully and turned to Ethan with a small, apologetic smile. "Good luck, son," he said sincerely. "I hope they see what I saw today." Ethan could only nod, overwhelmed by a strange cocktail of gratitude and despair. He muttered his thanks, pushed open the heavy door, and stepped out into the aftermath of the storm. The rain had lessened to a drizzle now, but the damage had been done. His shoes squished with every step across the pristine marble entranceway, leaving small puddles behind him like breadcrumbs leading nowhere. Inside the lobby, the air conditioning hit him like a wall of ice, raising goosebumps across his already chilled skin. Ethan approached the security desk, conscious of every squelch, every drip of water sliding from his ruined clothes. The receptionist, a middle-aged man in a crisp uniform, eyed him with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. "Good morning," Ethan managed, forcing the words past the tightness in his chest. "Ethan Parker. I had an interview scheduled for 9:30 with Whitmore Financial." The man consulted a tablet, then offered a polite but regretful smile. "I see your name on the list, sir, but your interview window has already closed." Ethan swallowed hard. "Is there any chance?" His voice trailed off, but the look in the man's eyes said everything. Rules were rules here. Time was sacred, and no allowance would be made for soaked, late young men, no matter how earnest their expressions or how desperate their circumstances. As Ethan turned away from the desk portfolio, clutched like a lifeline against his chest, a deep weariness settled into his bones. He had fought the storm, battled against the odds, and sacrificed everything he had to do what was right, and still it hadn't been enough. The towering lobby blurred before his eyes, but Ethan blinked the sting away fiercely. He wouldn't cry, not here, not now. He had made his choice with open eyes, knowing the likely cost. And standing there drenched and rejected at the gates of everything he had worked so hard for, Ethan Parker understood something profound. Sometimes doing the right thing didn't come with a reward. Sometimes it simply came with the knowledge that you had stayed true to yourself, even when the world offered no applause. Ethan stood silently for a long moment at the edge of the grand lobby, trying to gather himself. Around him, polished shoes clicked smartly across the marble floor, business suits flowed past him like rivers of certainty, and the towering glass walls let in a grey post-storm light that made the place look even more imposing. His hands trembled slightly from the cold and the weight of disappointment, but he forced his legs to move toward the reception desk. His soaked shoes made soft, squelching noises with every step, a small, humiliating soundtrack to his broken morning. As he approached the polished mahogany counter, the receptionist, a woman dressed immaculately in navy blue, looked up with a practiced smile that faltered only slightly when she took in his appearance. "Good morning," Ethan said, clearing his throat and forcing a steady tone despite the lump forming there. "My name is Ethan Parker. I had an interview scheduled for 9:30 a.m. with the Whitmore Financial Group." His voice, though quiet, carried a pleading edge he tried hard to suppress. The receptionist consulted her computer with swift efficiency before meeting his eyes again, her expression softening just a fraction. "I see your name here, Mr. Parker," she said kindly but firmly. "Unfortunately, your appointment time has passed, and the interview panel has already moved on to the next candidates." Ethan swallowed hard, the words hitting like a physical blow. Still, he nodded respectfully, refusing to let the wave of frustration, sadness, and exhaustion overpower him. "I understand," he replied, voice tight, "but I apologize for my lateness. The storm, it caused delays I couldn't avoid." There was a pause, brief but heavy, where Ethan could see the conflict in the receptionist's eyes. She wanted to help, but the rules of a place like Whitmore were not easily bent, even for a soaked, earnest young man who had clearly been through hell to get here. "If you'd like," she offered gently, "you can leave your resume. We'll keep it on file in case another opportunity opens up." Ethan knew the offer was a formality, a polite dismissal wrapped in corporate niceties, yet he smiled, grateful for even that small courtesy. Carefully, he extracted a dry copy of his resume from his battered portfolio, the one he had shielded most fiercely from the storm, and handed it to her with both hands. "Thank you," he said, simply meaning it. Not just for the gesture, but for treating him like a person, not just a missed appointment on a spreadsheet. The receptionist took the resume with a nod, tucking it away behind the desk. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, battling the urge to plead, to explain further, to somehow convince her to summon someone from upstairs who might hear him out, but he knew it would be useless. Whitmore Financial ran on precision, on punctuality, on the kind of unbending professionalism that left no room for messy stories about storm-soaked delays and flat tires. No, this chapter had already closed, whether he liked it or not. Gathering the shreds of his dignity, Ethan straightened his ruined suit jacket, tucked his portfolio under his arm, and offered the receptionist one final sincere, "Thank you for your time." She smiled a little more genuinely this time, and he turned away, his shoes squelching faintly against the marble floor as he made his way back toward the massive glass doors. As he stepped outside into the wet but clearing city, a blast of humid air hit him. The rain had slowed to a lazy drizzle, and the clouds above were beginning to thin, revealing shy glimpses of a blue sky beyond. The irony wasn't lost on him. The storm had spent itself, but so had his best chance. Ethan paused on the steps, watching the traffic crawl by, feeling the weight of lost opportunity settle heavily on his shoulders. Somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that he should have fought harder, should have demanded to see someone, should have insisted they hear his story. But louder still was the voice of his father, steady and unyielding. "Character is what you do when no one else is watching." Ethan Parker had chosen to act with integrity, and even though it had cost him dearly, it was a choice he would stand by. He drew a slow, shaking breath, letting it fill his lungs with the wet, heavy air, and stepped down onto the sidewalk. His dream, so close he could almost touch it just hours ago now, felt impossibly distant, like a ship disappearing on the horizon. Yet Ethan walked away with his head held high. He had not abandoned his values for convenience. He had not turned away from someone who needed help, even when everything he wanted was on the line. His suit was ruined, his portfolio battered, and his heart ached with the sharp, familiar sting of disappointment, but his self-respect remained untouched. As he moved through the busy streets, blending back into the flow of ordinary people with ordinary struggles, Ethan Parker knew this stormy morning would haunt him, but it would also define him, not for what he lost, but for what he refused to sacrifice: his own integrity. The days that followed felt heavier than any storm Ethan Parker had endured. He returned to his small apartment, carrying the defeat like an invisible weight draped across his shoulders. Every sound, the dripping faucet in the kitchen, the hum of traffic outside, even the soft rustle of papers as he adjusted his resume, seemed sharper, more hollow. He had sent out fresh applications, scrolling endlessly through job postings that offered half the prestige, half the promise of Whitmore Financial. His suit, now dry, but forever stained by the memory of that morning, hung from his closet door like a quiet rebuke. Ethan had told himself he had done the right thing, and he believed it, but that belief didn't make the sting of lost opportunity any less real. It was a lesson, perhaps, that sometimes life didn't immediately reward the choices made in the name of integrity. Sometimes it simply asked you to keep walking with your head held high, even when your heart wanted to fall apart. It was on the third morning, just as Ethan sat hunched over his laptop, rewriting another cover letter, that his phone buzzed across the table. Expecting another automated rejection, he answered with muted resignation, but the voice that greeted him made him sit upright so fast he nearly knocked over his coffee. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," the woman said, her tone crisp and professional. This is Claire Bennett, Executive Assistant to Mr. William Whitmore. We would like to invite you for a meeting this afternoon at 2:00 p.m. on the 90th floor. Ethan blinked, stunned, the words tumbling through his mind without fully connecting Whitmore Financial. The 90th floor, the executive floor. I'm available. He managed to stammer. Excellent, Claire said smoothly. Please check in with security upon arrival. You'll be expected. Before he could gather the courage to ask why now? After he had missed his original interview, the line disconnected, leaving him staring at his phone as if it had just whispered a secret too good to be true. For a long moment, Ethan simply sat there, disbelief warring with a cautious, flickering hope. Then instinct kicked in. He rose to his feet, heart pounding, and pulled out his suit. The same navy one, meticulously dry-cleaned, despite the permanent water stains no one else would notice. This time he double-checked every detail. Crisp white shirt, polished shoes, new copies of his resume, sealed safely in a waterproof folder. No surprises, no mistakes. He rehearsed answers to interview questions until the words felt like second nature, pacing the length of his apartment like an actor preparing for the performance of a lifetime. When he left for the subway an hour later, he gave himself so much extra time that even if another freak storm hit, he would still arrive early. This time he would not allow anything, weather, fate, or fear, to stand between him and whatever chance was being offered. Arriving at Whitmore Financial's towering headquarters felt like walking back into a dream. But today the sun shone brightly overhead, gleaming off the glass facade, and the air smelled of fresh beginnings. Ethan entered the lobby, his heart hammering, but his appearance and demeanor were immaculate. The security guard at the desk, different from the one he had met days ago, greeted him with a polite nod after checking the list. Welcome, Mr. Parker. You're cleared for the executive elevators, 90th floor, he said, handing Ethan a sleek visitor badge. Swallowing the lump of nervous excitement rising in his throat, Ethan made his way to the private elevator banks reserved for the highest tiers of the company. As the doors slid shut around him and the elevator began its smooth ascent, Ethan watched the numbers tick upward, wondering what on earth could be waiting for him at the top. The 90th floor was nothing like the corporate floors below. As the elevator doors opened with a soft chime, Ethan stepped into a world that felt almost surreal in its quiet luxury. The reception area was adorned with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering breathtaking panoramic views of the city skyline, the midday sun bathing the space in a warm golden glow. Original artworks, real ones, not prints, lined the walls. The furniture was rich, understated elegance, dark wood, soft leather, subtle accents of steel and glass. Everything from the scent of the fresh flowers on the side tables to the soft classical music playing somewhere overhead spoke of power, tradition, and meticulous attention to detail. Ethan crossed the gleaming marble floor to the reception desk, where a poised woman with a professional smile greeted him. "Mr. Parker, welcome," she said, rising to her feet. "Please have a seat. Mr. Whitmore will see you shortly." Ethan thanked her and took a seat in one of the deep leather chairs near the windows. For a few minutes he simply sat there, allowing himself to absorb it all. Just days ago he had stood dripping and broken in the lobby below, feeling as if the entire world had closed its doors on him. Now here he was, dry, prepared, invited, and about to meet someone on the floor where only the most important decisions were made. He had no illusions that this was a standard second interview. No ordinary candidate was summoned to the 90th floor. Whoever had decided to see him today, William Whitmore himself, perhaps had a reason. Ethan didn't know what it was yet, but as he adjusted his posture and smoothed invisible wrinkles from his pants, he knew one thing for certain. He would meet this opportunity with the same unwavering honesty and quiet strength that had carried him through every storm, every setback, every hard-earned step that had brought him here. As he waited, watching the city move below like a living tapestry, Ethan felt a quiet resolve settle over him. This was a second chance, a chance he hadn't begged for, hadn't manipulated, hadn't chased through frantic emails or desperate phone calls. It had come to him on its own, unexpected and unbidden, perhaps as a reward for doing the right thing when no one was watching, and he would honor that second chance with every fiber of his being. Whether the meeting ended in a job offer or a simple conversation, Ethan Parker would walk through that door proud of who he was. He didn't know yet what the future would hold, but for the first time in days he allowed himself to hope, and not the fragile, desperate hope of someone clawing for survival, but the steady, quiet hope of someone who had weathered the worst and found miraculously that he was still standing. The heavy wooden door opened with a soft click, and Claire Bennett, the poised executive assistant, stepped out, her calm expression giving nothing away. "Mr. Parker, Mr. Whitmore will see you now," she said. With a slight nod, Ethan rose from his chair, smoothing the front of his suit one last time, and followed her through a wide hallway lined with photographs depicting Whitmore Financial's long-storied history. Every step echoed quietly against the marble floor, a rhythmic reminder that this moment was real, that he had somehow found his way to the very top floor of a company he had once only dared to dream about. At the end of the hallway stood a pair of large mahogany doors. Claire opened one with a graceful push, revealing an expansive office bathed in sunlight, filled with dark wood furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling city below. Seated behind a massive desk was a figure who at first Ethan could barely process, a familiar figure who made him freeze in place. It was the old man from the storm, the stranger with the flat tire. Except now he wasn't just an elderly man struggling on a flooded street. Sitting there with the quiet command of someone accustomed to shaping fortunes was William Whitmore himself, the founder and CEO of Whitmore Financial Group and one of the most respected figures in the financial world. For a moment, Ethan couldn't speak. His mind reeled, trying to reconcile the image of the soaked, frustrated man he had helped days ago with the titan of industry, now calmly watching him from across a gleaming desk. "Come in, Ethan," Mr. Whitmore said, his voice warm and familiar. He gestured to a chair across from him. "Have a seat. We have much to discuss." Moving on instinct, Ethan crossed the room and sat down, his heart hammering in his chest. He had no idea what was about to happen, but he knew with certainty that this was no ordinary interview. William Whitmore studied Ethan for a long moment, his sharp blue eyes twinkling with something like amusement and something else, something deeper. "I imagine you're wondering why you're here." He began folding his hands on the desk. Ethan nodded mutely. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking softly. "The day we met," he continued, "I was having one of those mornings where everything that could go wrong did. My driver had the day off, and I foolishly thought I could manage the drive myself. The storm caught me by surprise, and the flat tire, well, let's just say it was a humbling experience." He smiled slightly, a hint of self-deprecation in his voice. "And then you came along, soaked to the bone late for what I suspect you knew was an important meeting, and still you chose to stop and help a stranger without any expectation of reward." Ethan swallowed hard emotions tangling in his throat as he listened. "You see, Ethan," Whitmore said, his tone growing more serious, "credentials resumes polished answers. Anyone can present those. But character only reveals itself when no one is watching, when the world isn't dangling a prize in front of you. That morning you showed me something I can't find in a resume or a transcript. You showed me who you are at your core." Ethan blinked, struggling to keep his composure. All the doubts he had carried over the past few days, the fear that doing the right thing had cost him everything, were being stripped away by the simple, unwavering truth in Whitmore's words. "I built this company." Whitmore continued, his voice steady, "on principles of integrity, loyalty, and courage. Over the years, I've learned that those qualities are far rarer and far more valuable than technical skill alone. You, Ethan Parker, have them." For a long moment, silence filled the office, heavy but not uncomfortable. Then Whitmore smiled again, this time more warmly. "Which brings me to why you're here," he said. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a sleek dark folder, sliding it across the desk toward Ethan. "Inside, you'll find an offer not for the entry-level analyst position you initially applied for, but for something much more significant. Ethan hesitated, his hands trembling slightly as he opened the folder. Inside was a formal letter bearing the Whitmore financial seal, offering him a position as special assistant to the CEO, a role that would place him directly under William Whitmore's mentorship, involved in major projects, strategic meetings, and leadership training. Unlike anything a junior analyst could hope for, Ethan stared at the letter, struggling to believe what he was seeing. Whitmore's voice broke through his stunned silence. This opportunity isn't just about what you know today, Ethan. It's about what you will become. I don't need someone who knows all the answers. I need someone I can trust to make the right decisions when no one is looking. Someone who understands that success isn't measured by how fast you climb, but by how firmly you hold on to your principles as you rise. Ethan closed the folder carefully, his chest tight with emotion. He looked up, meeting William Whitmore's steady gaze. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice rough with sincerity. "I won't let you down." Whitmore nodded approvingly, rising from his chair and extending his hand. "I know you won't," he replied. As Ethan stood and shook the older man's hand, he realized that the storm, the missed interview, the heartache, it had all been part of a journey far greater than he had imagined. A journey that was only just beginning. The following week unfolded like a dream. Ethan Parker never dared to dream. Within days of accepting the offer, he found himself signing papers that officially named him Special Assistant to William Whitmore, the founder and CEO of Whitmore Financial Group. It was a position so exclusive, so deeply entrenched within the company's inner workings that there wasn't even a formal listing for it on the company's public site. Special Assistant wasn't just a title, it was a signal. A signal that he was being invited not just to work at Whitmore Financial, but to be shaped by it, molded for something bigger. As he sat across from HR directors who treated him with a level of respect he had never before experienced, Ethan felt a profound shift take root inside him. This wasn't the end of his story. It wasn't even the middle. It was a new beginning, a chapter he had never anticipated when he first tightened his tie in his cramped apartment just days before. With the generous signing bonus deposited into his account, Ethan made the move from his worn-down studio apartment to a modest but bright one-bedroom space closer to the financial district. It wasn't extravagant, he had promised himself, and his mother he would remain grounded, but it was safe, clean, and for the first time in his life entirely his own, without fear of eviction, notices, or crumbling ceilings. As he unpacked the few belongings he owned into neat shelves and carefully assembled furniture, he felt a strange, humbling sense of gratitude. Every chipped coffee mug, every worn-out textbook from college, every framed photo of his mother's proud smile, it all carried the weight of every step, every sacrifice that had brought him here. And as he ironed his shirts for his first official day on the 90th floor, Ethan whispered a quiet vow to himself. He would honor every moment of this opportunity, not just by succeeding, but by remaining true to the values that had carried him through the storm. Walking into Whitmore Financial's executive floor that first morning, Ethan was greeted not as an outsider, but as a rising insider. Claire Bennett met him at the elevator with a welcoming smile and handed him a company laptop and phone. "Mr. Whitmore likes punctuality," she said, with a playful arch of her eyebrow, "and I see you've taken that to heart." Ethan smiled in return, feeling a calm confidence settle over him. His new office, tucked neatly 2 doors down from Whitmore's own, was modest compared to the grandeur of the executive suites, but to Ethan it was more than enough. A sleek mahogany desk, a high-backed chair, and a view that stretched for miles across the Manhattan skyline, it was more than he had ever thought to hope for. He set down his briefcase, ran his hand across the smooth surface of the desk, and allowed himself a moment to simply breathe it all in. He was here. He had arrived, not through shortcuts, not through connections, but through grit, grace, and an unshakable moral compass. The first days of training were unlike anything Ethan had ever experienced. Instead of being buried in spreadsheets or fetching coffee for higher-ups, he shadowed William Whitmore directly, attending high-level meetings, participating in strategic discussions, and reviewing confidential company documents. Whitmore treated him not as a subordinate, but as a student, a mentee. During long afternoon sessions in Whitmore's sunlit office, Ethan was invited to ask questions, challenge ideas, and offer observations. "I don't need another echo chamber," Whitmore told him one afternoon as they reviewed an acquisition proposal. "I need someone who sees what others miss because they weren't born into boardrooms." Ethan took the words to heart, realizing that his background, once a source of insecurity, was now his greatest strength. He understood hard work, resilience, and the value of seeing people not as numbers on a ledger, but as human beings with stories. Word of Ethan's appointment spread quietly through the company, and while there was initial curiosity and even some skepticism among the older executives, it didn't take long for his work ethic and sincerity to win them over. His perspective brought a freshness that the firm desperately needed but hadn't realized it was missing. Ethan saw things others overlooked. He asked questions seasoned veterans had forgotten to ask. In board meetings, his voice, once tentative, grew stronger as he learned to frame his insights with clarity and respect. And each time he spoke, he noticed subtle shifts, nods of acknowledgement, glances of consideration from those around him. He wasn't there just to fill a chair. He was there to contribute, to challenge, to inspire. Ethan's authenticity, sharpened by hardship and polished by perseverance, was no longer a liability. It was a cornerstone for the future Whitmore Financial envisioned. Through it all, William Whitmore remained his fiercest advocate. At every turn, he reinforced the message that Ethan's value was not measured by pedigree, but by principle. "The world doesn't need more polished resumes," Whitmore said one evening as they watched the city lights flicker on across the skyline. "It needs people willing to stand in the rain for what's right." Ethan carried those words like armor, understanding more each day that success wasn't just about reaching the top, it was about how you climbed and what you held on to as you rose. As the weeks turned into months, Ethan Parker's name became quietly, steadily respected within the towering walls of Whitmore Financial Group. Not because he was the fastest or the smartest or the most connected, but because when the storm had come, and it would surely come again, he had proven he would not run from it. He would stand tall, soaked to the bone, and still choose to do what was right. The day of Ethan Parker's first board meeting arrived with the kind of electric anticipation he hadn't felt since his graduation day. The stakes were higher now. No longer was he simply proving himself to a hiring committee. Now he was stepping into a room filled with some of the sharpest financial minds in the country, many of whom had spent decades building Whitmore Financial into the powerhouse it was today. As he adjusted his tie in the mirror that morning, Ethan felt the familiar knot of nerves tighten in his chest. But unlike before, there was something steadier beneath the surface, a quiet resolve built from everything he had endured to reach this moment. He wasn't here because of a perfect resume or a flawless interview. He was here because he had made a decision in the middle of a storm that revealed something greater than ambition, integrity. And today, whatever challenges lay ahead, he would meet them the same way. As Ethan stepped into the vast boardroom, he was greeted by the polished gleam of a massive mahogany table, surrounded by stern-faced executives in tailored suits. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline behind them, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the room. William Whitmore sat at the head of the table, a commanding presence without ever needing to raise his voice. He gestured for Ethan to take a seat to his right, a position of quiet honor that did not go unnoticed by the others. As the meeting began, complex discussions flew fast and sharp around the table: quarterly, earnings, emerging markets, risk strategies. Ethan listened carefully, absorbing the rhythm of the conversation, the unspoken hierarchies, the sharp glances that conveyed as much meaning as words. He took notes, his pen moving quickly across the paper, but he knew he would have to do more than observe. Sooner or later, he would be called upon to speak. That moment came sooner than he expected. Midway through the meeting, the board turned their attention to a struggling subsidiary in the Midwest, a company Whitmore Financial had invested heavily in, but which now teetered on the brink of collapse. The CFO, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Vance, delivered her recommendation crisply: cut losses, liquidate assets, move on. "It's a clean break," she said, tapping her finger against the report. "No need to throw good money after bad." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Then Whitmore's voice cut through the air, calm but unmistakably directive. "Ethan," he said, turning slightly toward him, "you've reviewed the file. What's your view?" For a heartbeat, the room went utterly silent. Every eye turned toward the young man who only months ago had been drenched and overlooked in the lobby below. Ethan took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on his shoulders, but he did not shrink from it. He stood, his notes clutched firmly in his hand, and spoke with the same quiet conviction that had guided him through every challenge. "The numbers are clear." He began acknowledging the data. "But numbers don't tell the full story. This company employs over 1,500 people. If we liquidate, we're not just cutting financial losses. We're dismantling livelihoods, families, communities, futures. I believe there's a restructuring option that hasn't been fully explored. It may not offer the fastest return, but it would uphold the values Whitmore Financial was built on: resilience, loyalty, and long-term vision." His voice, though steady, carried an undeniable force, the words landing heavily in the quiet room. Several executives exchanged glances. A few leaned forward, considering. Ethan sat down slowly, heart-pounding, but he kept his gaze steady, refusing to second-guess the choice to speak his truth. After a long pause, a faint smile touched William Whitmore's lips. "Exactly the perspective we needed," he said, nodding. "Sometimes the right decision isn't the most convenient one. Sometimes it costs more in the short term, but the dividends it pays in loyalty and reputation are worth more than any quarterly profit." Around the table, heads nodded, and the conversation shifted not toward liquidation, but toward exploring restructuring strategies, just as Ethan had suggested. As the meeting continued, Ethan felt a quiet sense of triumph, not the kind born from defeating others, but the kind born from standing firmly in his own principles. He hadn't tried to impress with jargon or cleverness. He had simply told the truth with clarity and heart. And in doing so, he had earned something far more valuable than a nod of approval. He had earned respect. Later that evening, as the board members filed out and the sun dipped below the skyline, William Whitmore approached Ethan by the windows overlooking the city. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the lights flicker to life far below. Then Whitmore spoke, his voice low and thoughtful. "Success," he said, "isn't built in moments of applause or recognition. It's built in the choices you make when no one is watching, when the easy path is right there and you choose the harder, better one." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth of those words settle deep inside him. The storm he had faced that day outside the Whitmore building hadn't destroyed his future. It had revealed it. It had cleared away the illusions, the easy victories, and shown him that real success, the kind that mattered, was built on integrity, courage, and heart. As he left the boardroom that night, Ethan didn't feel like a boy chasing a dream anymore. He felt like a man who had earned his place not through privilege or shortcuts, but through choices made when no one else was watching. And he knew with unshakable certainty that whatever storms might come in the future, he would meet them the same way head-on, standing tall with the same quiet strength that had carried him through the worst and brought him here to stay. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the quiet power of integrity, we invite you to become part of the Deep Inside HQ family. Here we believe in celebrating real strength, the kind built on resilience, compassion, and the choices we make when no one is watching. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring journeys that prove success isn't just about reaching the top. It's about staying true to who you are along the way. Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and share this video with someone who needs a little reminder that doing the right thing always matters. Together, let's honor the path of courage, one story at a time.